At the New Indian, we have with us Aravindan Neelakandan. He's a scholar, consulting editor of Savrajya magazine, and also a researcher. He has worked on sustainable agriculture, technologies, as well as culture and history of India. Welcome to Reason, the New Indians platform where we get to the reason behind the issues that concern you. Welcome to the New Indian.
Namaste.
Let me begin this conversation with your upcoming book, Hindutva. I found the title quite intriguing, and I also was quite taken back by the fact that you have done exhaustive research on the very concept, the issue of Hindutva, which is controversial for many and quite mainstream for many in India. I want you to explain for our audience in probably 2 lines first, what is Hindutva?
Hindutva is not an ideology, it is a process. It is the national process that has created the Indian nation, sustains the Indian nation, and if India is to progress in a very positive, prosperous way forward, it has to be in sync with the wavelength of Hindutva.
Now, a lot of people in this country for the last 30, 40 years have been saying Hindutva is a fascistic vision of India. It is essentially taking India back into regression, taking back into its past, where you don't really find much to take this nation forward. Would you agree with that?
It's absolutely wrong because Hindutva is the basis for progress in India. You see, in any society, there will be social stagnation, forces of social stagnation, and forces of social emancipation. In the case of India, the forces of social emancipation, they have always come from the heart of India's essence, which is Hindutva. Let me give you 2 solid examples from very modern time of Indian history. Know that it is an anthropological fact. For women empowerment, the marriage age of women should go up. Child marriages would stop women's education and women moving into the society. In all the societies, you will find that at a particular point of time, particularly during the medieval time, child marriages have become rampant. Okay? Even in the West, child marriages become rampant. For example, in the canonical laws of the church, child marriage was kind of allowed, and it was only recently the Pope Francis came and raised the age of girls. But they said that, okay, but we will allow in every nation, we would abide by the constitution of that nation. Now you take India. In India also child marriage was there. But who were the ones who fought against this? Not the so-called progressive people. The person who fought against this and who created the act for banning child marriage, and that act is called Sharda Act. His name was Harbilas Sharda. And he also wrote a book called Supremacy of Hindu Civilization. So you have here, it is a Hindutvaite who actually was responsible for women empowerment. This is 2022 and next year is going to be 2023. 100 years ago, 1923, a resolution was passed in Bombay Legislative Assembly. Okay, that legislation was for opening up the public spaces to the marginalized, socially excluded communities. So the water bodies, parks, roads, they were all opened up for these socially excluded communities. A resolution was passed to that effect. That resolution was passed by a person called C.K. Bole, Sitaram Keshav Bole. And it was this resolution that led to Dr. Ambedkar's Mahat Satyagraha. Otherwise, that wouldn't have happened. Who was this C.K. Bole? He became the provincial head of Hindu Mahasabha in Bombay. And he asked Dr. Ambedkar to make the saffron flag the national flag of India. So now I just gave you 2 examples where fundamental social progressive changes were effected in India by 2 great persons when the times were dark. Colonialism and social stagnation, Yet they created this change and they both belong to Hindutva. So how you can say that Hindutva is fascist or it is socially regressive, obscurantist and all that?
Why is there fascination or this eagerness for scholars, for intellectuals and media in India to compare Hindutva with Italian fascism or Nazism of Germany?
The very direct answer would be mediocre scholarship. It is tyranny of mediocrity. Very mediocre, or even I would say sub-mediocre scholarship. For example, you take this question of Mussolini and Dharmavir Munche. Munche went, visited Mussolini's Italy, and then he called for militarization of India, blah, 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 right? But actually look at the facts. Did he visit only Italy? He visited Italy, he visited France, he visited England, and he visited all the military schools. Why did he do so? He did so because the British government in India had declared certain races as martial races, certain communities as martial communities, and barred all other communities to enter into military. And Dr. Munje wanted to study how military education is given in Western countries. And he studied them and he told that the same way you should give military education here at the school level to all the communities, irrespective of to what community a person belongs. So actually, the British colonial government was implementing some kind of a racial segregation,
Yes.
which actually aligns with the Nazi ideology. And here is Munche, who studies all these different European nations, and he wants to democratize the military institution. And you take only one part of that, show it, you write a paper on it based on the microfilms on the National Archives, etc., and you tell that so this Italian fascism had influenced Hindu nationalism in India. See, this is essentially, if you have done the same thing with respect to some European political party or political ideology, then how you would be dealt with in academia? You would be dealt with as a fraud, right? But here, a person does this and that person actually gets celebrated, quoted again and again, recycled again and again. Of course, I know recycling waste is a very good ecological practice, but recycling lies is not. It is very bad.
You have also, in your book, actually done a comparative analysis of how the West or the Christian communities in the West look at racism and how Indian society has looked at racism. There's a divergence of thinking, and that's what you are saying in your book. Explain for our audience, why do you think Indians are not racist in the way the West is?
Indians are not racist because we recognize divine in all humans, irrespective of the race, ethnicity, gender, etc., etc. Okay. The case of the West, they had believed in this Hamitic myth, where the Noah curses the children of Ham to be the slaves of the children of the other two sons, Shem and Japheth. So racism becomes a kind of biblical. You essentialize a particular community based on your own prejudices, and then you tell that I am civilizationally superior to you. It served your own agenda of colonizing the world and then calling it civilizing mission. So racism actually served the economic purposes of the West. When the West could do away with the racism, they did away with the racism. You take India. India by very nature was against this kind of essentializing. If you look at all our Puranic narratives, all our narratives, you will find that, see, we have to make a very clear distinction about the civilizational values, about the spiritual values of India and the general society of India. The general society of India, you will have all these trends. I would like to essentialize, stereotype another person from another community, another state, another language. This tendency is there in human beings. But the Hindu culture has always been working against this tendency and telling us, no, don't do that. It is wrong. Don't think of socially excluded as somebody inferior to you. Actually, the divine may come in the form of the socially excluded also. So be respectful to them. So you take the Hindu values have always been making the Hindu society free of its spontaneous prejudices. Okay, and because of that, a Savarkar in 1923 could write that in 1923 even the greatest humanists in the West, they were believing in race, essentially racial categories, and they consider it as very scientific. At that time, Savarkar was writing in 1923, he was telling that the only fundamental truth is the unity of human race from pole to pole. And every race has every other race blood flowing in its vein. So no human being can claim himself to belong to a kind of a pure race. And only fundamental unity of humanity is the truth. Everything else is relative. Something that gets proved by genetical studies decades after Savarkar.
But you see, your critics might, in fact, they often bring up the issue of caste and caste discrimination. They, in fact, you've written in your book at length about Manusmriti being quoted everywhere as this text, the scripture, which showcases India in a very bad light, showcases Indian society, Indian ethos, philosophy, which you call Hindutva, in a very, very discriminatory, in a very almost like racism, almost like segregating society along different lines. What would you say to that?
There was, I have forgotten exactly the university, a particular university in the United States, they brought out a very beautiful compilations of called Sociology through Science Fiction and Anthropology through Science Fiction. In one of those, there was a short story by Isaac Asimov, and the author would also write an introductory note aligning his science fiction with a particular social concept. There was a short story of Isaac Asimov called Strike Breaker. So it was about a particular occupation considered as defiled in a particular planet, and when people do a strike or something, a person comes and he does it, he becomes defiled, etc., etc. So then he wrote about this in his introduction. He told that in any society, when the resources become scarce, when the mobility gets reduced, the social stratification will become very, very rigorous. Okay. So this social stratification that happens, it happens in all the societies, and it happens because of secular factors. And then whenever there is social hierarchy, naturally there will be social exclusion and social aristocracy. So this happens in all the societies. And all the societies, there are certain theological justifications for such things because they wanted the society to run at that time. We are talking about pre-modern societies. During colonialism, what happened? The resources of the Western society increased like anything.
Yes.
For example, Australia is 9 times the size of India. So when you have such abundance of resources, then you can do away with your social stratification at the cost of human misery imported to Africa, Australia, Asia, and Native America. Right? At that cost, they could do away with their social stratification. Even then, they couldn't do it away properly. They could do it away. And then what they did?
But even when they had lot of resources, the British took resources from India, they took raw materials from India. But even at that point of time, the British society was quite stratified socially because we know that they had knighthoods and then they had the royalty and then they had the peasant class. And
in fact, they had 7 layers.
Exactly.
They had 7 layers and they justified it by telling that there are 7 layers in the heaven, there are 7 layers in the society. So God created it that way. Okay, that theology was there for them. But in the case of India, what happened was during the colonial time, our resources were getting drained. The same time, our mobility was getting restricted. So what happens? Here the social stratification becomes rigorous, and along with that comes the British, and they tell that your jati system is your dharma. They essentialize it. This is what happens. Now we come to the question of Manusmriti or any Dharma Shastra for that matter.
But before you come to Manusmriti, I want to interject here and I want you to tell us what was society like before the British colonialists took over. During the Mughal era, during the Islamic era, during the Muslim rule, was society not socially stratified along the caste?
At no point of time there existed any utopia anywhere in the world. It is also true for India. So the same thing I told you. You take the Vedic society. The Vedic society was different from Vedic values. Okay. So in the Vedic society was there social stratification, social discrimination, social exclusion. They were all there in the Vedic society. We have very clear proofs for that. At the same time, what was the Vedic value? There is in Sadabada Brahmana a very wonderful incident. There was a big drought and they were doing this Adhiratra Yajna, which is related to Soma. They were doing the Adhiratra Yajna to bring the rains. A lot of important, great sages had assembled there. And one of the greatest scholars of Adhiratra Yajna was Kavashaka. He was sitting there and the other sages, they saw him and said that this guy is a Brahmana. This guy's mother has been working in this gambling houses as a dasi. So how could he sit here? Let us throw him out. Okay, that is the society. So there was social exclusion, definitely. There was social stratification and social discrimination. He was thrown out. And then Kavashaka, that utter humiliation that he was facing, he becomes a Mandradrishta. And he sings to Saraswati. And then Saraswati starts flowing. And then the sages realize their mistake and they come and ask his forgiveness. Now that is the Vedic value. Now, what should define your civilization? Something that you share with all other civilizations or something that is unique to you? Something that is unique to you. Now, what is unique to Indian civilization is that the challenging of social discrimination and social exclusion through spirituality. Nowhere else in the world, before the onset of modernism, before the Enlightenment era and everything happened, and before they could do away with the social discrimination, they never questioned the social discrimination. It was there. Has there been any single story? Has there been any single incident throughout the history of these cultures where they have questioned deeply the social stratification? No. Only the Indian society did that. Yet we get essentialized by social exclusion.
The West might put forth this argument to you that they had Magna Carta, they had Bill of Rights, American Constitution, they had several reform movements, they had several amendments to their constitution which removed racism, which removed discrimination. There is affirmative action for underprivileged people, for Native Indians whom Americans actually wiped out. So they would argue that their civilization also had such moments of introspection, such moments of reform, and as civilizations they have progressed and evolved. Yes, they did certain things which were harmful to other societies and other cultures, but eventually through introspection they have removed all those discriminations.
Through introspection or because they could now do it, they were in a good economical position, so they could do away with it. For example, they did away with slavery. There was a great anti-slavery movement in England to do away with slavery. But if you look at it very carefully, you will find a very interesting thing. At that time, in England, when this anti-slavery movement was happening, and Bishop Wilberforce, he was the one who was sitting under the tree, and suddenly he heard God telling that my people are suffering and you have to fight for their rights, etc., etc. And they went and fought for the removal of slavery. They did all that, okay, anti-slavery campaign, everything. But look at it very carefully. You will find that at that time, two brands of sugar were fighting for the market in England. One was from India through East India Company. Another was from Caribbean. And the Caribbean sugar was produced by slave labor. And it was mostly owned by the Society for the Propagation of Gospels. And this was owned by East India Company and mainly London Mission Church. Okay. And most of the people who fought against slavery were directors of East India Company. And there they were using indentured labor. So they thought that, and later the entire West came to realize that actually indentured labor is profitable than slavery. You have to own the slave, you have to feed him throughout the end of his life. No need here. Indentured labor, you can just shorten your, you can maximum, you can get the work at the same time, you can shorten the economic benefits you are given to him. Given
So
to the
you are
person. So,
essentially saying that the West has retained its colonial mindset. They have retained its imperialistic, exploitative mindset still. And whatever reformation has happened, it has happened because of economic considerations, not spiritual considerations.
mainly because of economic, I would say, considerations. And that would have induced certain people genuinely to fight against the injustice they were seeing. But what enables them was this economic conditions. I will give you another example. There was a great spiritual social reformer called Sri Narayana Guru in South India. You would have heard of him.
Yes.
And his
From Kerala.
from Kerala. At that time, he fought for prohibition in his community, which actually affected his community in an adverse economic way. But nevertheless, he campaigned for it because that was spiritually correct. Okay, so economic considerations were not there. Despite the economic disadvantages, they were putting forth a proper justified thing because of the dharmic impulse that they have had. Now, coming back to the question of during the Islamic onslaught, during those times, the medieval times, how it was. The medieval times, the general narrative that is being generated right now is that Islam is a religion of equality. It came here, and so the so-called the lower caste people, they got attracted to Islam, etc., etc.
Yes, that's why I wanted to ask that question.
In reality, if you look at the way they converted, if you go and look into the documents, actually you will find something very surprising, that they were not worried about this. Islam was not projecting itself as a religion of equality, or the people here were not finding Islam as some kind of socialist panacea before modern times. No, it was not happening. Actually, what was happening was that Islam further made the Jati system very rigid. I will give you a solid example for this. Tipu. Okay. Why we call only Tipu Tipu Sultan? You don't call Akbar Akbar Sultan. You don't call Aurangzeb Aurangzeb Sultan. Only Tipu. The entire thing you call Sultan. What is the reason for this? The reason for this is that Tipu comes from a very ordinary background, no royal background for him. But if he is to command the respect of his Muslim soldiers, he should become a sultan. And that sultan title would not be given to a person just because he was ruling a particular land. And so he was going and begging literally the Mughal emperor. At that time, the Mughal empire was dying and the Marathas were gaining ascendancy. And the Mughal emperor said, at the most, I can call you Zamindar, I can't call you a sultan. Then Tipu writes to Caliph. Before that, he sends emissary to Hyderabad Nizam asking for his daughter, so that you are getting a royal princess and your status would go up. And Hyderabad Nizam in the court says that, you know, that guy was a low-born guy, he didn't belong to the noble force divisions, so I cannot give you a daughter. So this guy goes and writes to Caliph, Turkey. And he says that, see here the infidel Marathas are gaining this, and the Mughal empire is not very strong to take the banner of Islam. I am the only person left. So you make me sultan. But that Caliph was also not ready to do that, because Caliph was having problems with the French and he was having some good relations with the British. So he was like kind of hesitant to do that. So Tipu had to put that word sultan behind his name.
How did you say that Islamic rulers calcified the Jati system? What is the evidence?
One important aspect was that the society, this is something that is parallel, that has a parallel between the Islamic imperialism and British colonialism. The communities that were fighting strongly against them, they were made to do defiled occupations, and then they were made untouchables. A very good example is people who were doing the hygiene work. Okay, and if you look at those communities had actually fought against very fiercely against the people, and they were not compromising. So when they were captured, they were given either you do this defiled trade or you get converted to Islam. So they prefer to do the defiled trade rather than get converted to Islam. So you have here this system. The same thing goes for the British. The communities that resisted British strongly, they were made into criminal castes.
So, who converted? If we go by your theory that actually Islam was not projecting itself as a religion of equality and egalitarianism, then where did this come from that the lower castes in India converted because Islam was offering equality? Where did it come from?
Actually, if you go and ask the people who really got converted, the communities who got converted, they would tell you that not now, some 50 years back, they would have told you that we were not low caste people, we were actually very great Kshatriya branch or this or that, we were ruling elite or we were great merchants and we got converted. That is what they would have told you. See, what Islam did was, they converted at the point of sword. That was one section. Another was, they created an environment in which conversion to Islam got facilitated. Every time you have to go and you have to pay jizya, you will be getting insulted. Along with your family, you have to go, stand in the queue, and then that officer, the Muslim officer who is sitting there, would be spitting at you. And
so there was an economic factor.
Rather than psychological factor. They created a situation. They created a kind of atmosphere in which you would think that, okay, all gods are same and I am getting humiliated like this, why don't I get converted? So they got converted. So that is another one way in which these major conversions happened. They created the atmosphere. Otherwise, see, if you are getting created at the point of sword, there is a strong possibility that in the next generation you may go back. The first convenient opportunity you may go back. But if you create an environment of psychological intimidation, and the Islamist culture, the Islamist state perfected this through jizya, through dimitude. So if you create this very strong psychological intimidation.
But wouldn't your critics also refer to Manusmriti, which was the original question? Wouldn't they also refer to the prevailing pre-existing system in India, which was that society was divided along different castes?
Another one very important thing that we have to take into account is that this was not a text-based society. So Manusmriti was reflecting some of the prejudices, Manusmriti was reflecting some of the good things that were happening in that situation, and it codified it into this. That's all.
So you agree that Manusmriti
was not Shariat.
Yeah, but it had certain prejudices against
Definitely it had prejudices. That is actually, I would say, not justifiable but understandable. In pre-modern societies, this kind of prejudices are understandable. And in fact, you take greatest of some of the Christian theologians of simultaneously, actually what Sitaram Goel says is a very important thing. He says that if you are going to compare Manusmriti, you don't compare Manusmriti with the Proclamation of Independence of the United States. You compare Manusmriti with the canonical laws of that time,
yes,
that were written in Europe. Then if you compare that, you will find that Manusmriti is far better than that. Okay. So, but if we try to kind of justify Manusmriti in 20th century, telling that it was a paragon of virtues only, then we would be in a very wrong spot.
Okay. Yeah.
So, what I was coming to say about
that there was a pre-existing social stratification in India.
It was there. As I said, all the societies had that, but it was only in India this social stratification was continuously getting challenged. And so, when the British...
And the evidence you are saying is the reformists within the Hindu society.
They were always there, and these reformers were not even conscious reformers. They were not coming here to change the society. The very spiritual instinct in them challenged the social stratification and social exclusion. It was spontaneous. They didn't have an agenda of social reform. Just they existed, and that itself challenged the social stratification and social exclusion very strongly through their spiritual, dharmic lives.
But let me ask a different question. You yourself recognized and admitted that Manusmriti was written in a certain context, in a certain history, in a certain time. And it's understandable whatever prejudices were there.
But not justifiable.
Yeah, are not justifiable, but understandable because there's a
Yes.
certain context and time.
Yes.
One could make the same argument for, say, Quran or Shariat or Hadith or other canonical scriptures that you mentioned, that they were written in a certain context. But if you look at the West today, they have moved on. They have left all those scriptures aside and they came up with their own, as I said, Magna Carta, Bill of Rights. They have constitution, they have universal human rights. They evolved with time. Do you think Hindu society, in fact, many people who are now saying that Hindutva is the vision for the future of India, do you think that we could go back to the text, could go back to the scriptures, or could go back to, a lot of people quote, say, Vedic scriptures, saying that we need all those scriptures back and we need to go back in time? Do you think that is a sensible approach to the whole issue?
Actually, as I said earlier, in Hindu society and Hindu Dharma is not text based, it is experience based. And so, you don't have to go back to anything. You don't have to go back to your Vedas, you don't have to go back to the Puranas, you don't have to go back to the basics or anything. You have it along with you all the time and it has been making you adapt to the changing environment. You allow it to happen. That is what I would say. That is what has happened actually, whether it is Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or whether it is Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aravindan. You take any of these people, you will find that this has happened so naturally.
Yes.
And they represented, take for example, Ramana Maharishi. Ramana Maharishi, did he study the Vedas? Did he go through any specific particular text-based workout to attain enlightenment? No. When he attained enlightenment, naturally, he became the torchbearer of the Vedic science of self-realization. It happened naturally. The same way. But this has also problems. For example, you may have a fraudulent person coming and claiming, and that is a problem that you have with all open-ended democratic processes. So, in open-ended democratic processes, there will be a lot of space for you to fall and for you to move forward. The same way here also there are a lot of spaces. But the point is, the Hindu society does not have to go back to any text. Hindu society is the only society, Hindu civilization is the only civilization, Hindu Dharma is the only Dharma that has subordinated the text to the experience, to the authentic conscious experience. So we have this wonderful imagery where we say that the goddess stands on the Vedas. That is a very strong imagery. It's a pan-Indian imagery. From Kashmir to Kanyakumari, you have that imagery. What does it mean? Goddess is the divine feminine, the consciousness. So this conscious experience of consciousness.
Yes, in fact, you have also written how Sikhism also has these components of feministic
divine
Shakti.
feminine.
Yeah.
Emanating. So we subordinate text to the divine consciousness. And that forms the hallmark of Indian civilization or Hindutva. And so Hindutva is not some kind of a fundamentalist movement that says go back to the text. It doesn't say that.
You've written a lot about caste. You've written also a lot about cow slaughter and lynchings over beef in India. And this is one issue which riles up a lot of people both domestically as well as abroad. So tell us, if Hindu society is all about experience, do you think cow slaughter, where a huge section of society says that beef is an economic food for many poor people, this is an argument that I hear at some platforms, and some say that it is completely all right to have beef if we can have sheep, we can have lamb, we can have goats, chicken, why not beef? So, what is the wisdom, or you can say enlightenment, which you draw from the Hindu experience or the experience of the collective?
We can look at it in different ways. One is that cow protection, veneration of the cow is a strong indicator. For example, you take a forest ecosystem. Why do we talk about always the protection of the tiger, not the protection of deer, or not the protection of some other animal? Why we take tiger protection is very important. The number of tigers in a particular forest ecosystem is important because it is an indicator of the health of the entire ecosystem. If the tigers are there in this particular number, then that particular system is well and good. That is what we think. The same way here, the veneration of the cow is an, I would say, a indicator of your green consciousness, indicator of your eco-awareness, indicator of how you are feeling yourself indebted to the rest of nature, right? So that way, the cow protection becomes very symbolic, number one. Number two, cow protection is also economically important. Cow protection is also culturally important for India. You would have heard of that great Marxist anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist he was. His name was Marvin Harris. And he wrote an entire thesis on this, why Hindus venerate cow. And he told that this has very strong cultural, economic reasons, and also there are strong cultural memories when the great famines made Hindus understand that protection of cow is very important, vital for their survival. Number three, if you are going to make beef eating part and parcel of Indian culture, and Indian culture has built a lot of checks and balances when you are a non-vegetarian person. Okay. For example, there was something called Green Text by National Geographic, and they studied consecutively for 3 or 4 years. They are 4 to 5 years. They were doing a kind of research into the food cultures of the people, and they found that the Indian food culture has always been ecologically most favorable. That is because we shun certain type of meat largely. Number two, Indian non-vegetarians. They are the most important contributors to this particular ecological aspect of Indian food culture. Okay, often we fall into this binary of vegetarian versus non-vegetarians. India never had this. You can be a non-vegetarian. At the same time, it recognizes the right of you to be a non-vegetarian, but the culture builds certain cultural checks and balances. So you won't eat, even if you are a non-vegetarian, you won't eat non-veg food on a Friday or a Tuesday. You won't eat non-vegetarian food on a new moon day or a full moon day. And if you are going to Sabarimala, for 40 days you won't eat non-vegetarian food. If it is Darpana, if it is Tidhi for your parents, you are going to do the puja, you won't eat non-vegetarian food.
In fact, in Kashmir, where I come from, Muslim Sufi saints and their shrines actually observe this. They don't eat meat on certain days. It's like banned for everyone, not just for Hindus, but banned for Muslims also.
Right.
So this practice is there. In fact, in your book, you mentioned that Akbar banned cow slaughter at all.
And Bahadur Shah Safar also during 1857, he not only banned cow slaughter, he said that on Fagrit, if you are going to kill a cow, you will be killed. That is what he said. Yes. Okay. The point here is again, so the Hindu culture does not tell that eating non-vegetarian is bad or anything. It creates these checks and balances, so the ecological balance will be there and you won't eat excess of meat and destroy the living organisms. The same way, cow being very important, the cow meat was completely prohibited. And when the cow dies, then its carcass would be eaten by people. And remember, naturally, in an agricultural society, when this happens, the people who eat the carcass, then they would be looked upon kind of down by these people, agricultural people. Okay, so it becomes a taboo. It emerges. Now, in Saiva literature, you find these very interesting lines that even if a person is skinning the cow and eating its flesh, naturally dead cow, skinning the cow and eating its flesh, even such a person, if he is a devotee of Shiva, then I consider him worthy of my worship. Okay, this is part of a canonical scripture in Tamil. Okay, so you find this sentiment also at the same time. A chandal, a person who eats the cow hide or cow meat, even that person should not be considered as socially excluded. It should not be looked down, and he should be considered, the divine within him should be recognized. That is there. This is the spontaneously emerging prejudice is countered by India's genuine Hindu spirituality. Now, what happens with the Islamic invasion is that cow slaughter becomes a symbol of humiliating Hindus. So they start slaughtering the cow right inside the sanctum sanctorum of the temples.
Which
so that
Aurangzeb, you mentioned in your book,
Yes.
Aurangzeb
right,
purposely.
they were doing that. Then cow protection becomes necessary. It becomes the symbol of Hindu resistance to Islamist imperialism. It is theodiversity's resistance to this monopolistic expansionism. That is how you have to do it. See it. Then, when the colonial times come, is very interesting. The same way that I have mentioned in the book, the same way they finished off the bisons,
Yes.
which were sacred animals in the American plains,
Yeah.
to break the cultural spine of Native Americans. The same way they were trying to destroy India's
In fact, bison is now an endangered
animal. They have brought it back
species.
exactly because now they could afford to do that. They had finished off the Native Americans. They have broken their spine. Now they can talk about this becoming endangered and preserving it, etc., etc. They tried the same here with the cows. And the minute they touched the cows, India's freedom movement started.
Yes.
Right from Punjab. The first Swadesi movement in India had predicated itself upon cow protection. So we have to see cow in this holistic way.
But then the way politics has been played on cow protection by the BJP, by the Sangh, it has brought ugly scenarios like some people getting lynched, which you wrote in your book. And now you're saying that the Sangh has moved on from that and there is a different approach to the whole issue. Explain it for our audience. What is that approach? Why is the Sangh open to eating beef in Northeast and banning cow slaughter in Uttar Pradesh and other states?
Well, if you look at the Sangh's association with the problem of cow slaughter and beef eating, right now from Guruji Golwalkar, they have been very clear about one thing. They were not for violence. They were not for violence in using violence to stop beef eating or cow slaughter. Cow slaughter is different from beef eating. We have to make the very clear difference here. Beef eating is something different. Cow slaughter is something different. Cow slaughter, particularly in public places, is done to humiliate Hindus. Okay. And Bal Gangadhar Tilak has written about this, and Veer Savarkar has written about this, and Guruji Golwalkar made it into a movement to show the Hindus that the Indian state is very, very alienated from the actual Hindu national being. So he started it purely as an exercise of kind of a strategy to get Hindus aware of the nature of Indian state, how alienated Indian state is from the Hindu nation. He started it that way, but later he realized that it cannot be just a strategy because it belongs to the spirit of the people. The people made Guruji Golwalkar understand this. He saw a woman, an ordinary woman who was almost a very poor woman, go from village to village to village with pamphlets of demanding the stopping of cow slaughter. So then he realized that at the same time, the same Guruji Golwalkar also saw that there are tribal communities which have not gone into agriculture, which are still at the hunting gathering stage, and they were eating cow. And you cannot go and force your food culture and even your cow veneration on them. And he said, when they come to the agricultural stage, when they start doing agriculture, naturally they may come to cow veneration, but let us not impose this. This is the nature of Hindutva actually. This is the nature of Hindutva. It is, cow protection is not a Shariat. Let me take a very interesting personality here, Mahatma Gandhi. So Mahatma Gandhi makes cow protection even more interesting because he says that we should not have a legislation but rather we should make every Muslim realize that cow slaughter is wrong. What exactly does he mean by that? From the outside, it may look like appeasement, but it was not. He was telling Hindus to go do outreach for cow protection, convert them,
Yes.
change their mind, and make them venerate
Persuade
the
them.
cow.
Persuasion.
Not just persuasion, convert them, transform them so they will also venerate the cow. They are not going to tell that, okay, because Hindus believe, I am not doing it. Rather, they themselves would say that we also venerate the cow.
Yes.
So, to get them to that point, he was ready, he was telling Hindus to go and work. So, if you look at all this, you will find one thing: violence or imposition had never been our way with respect to these things. But when cow slaughter is done purposefully to humiliate us, we have been fighting. That is one. Now come to lynching. I think in Swarajya, my colleague Swati Goyal Sharma, she had done extraordinary work compiling all these things, not just lynching for cattle smuggling. It was not actually lynching. It was actually a fight between cattle smugglers and cattle owners. It was a very secular fight. And there were somehow terrorist organizations involved in using this cattle smuggling to fund their activities. So when the cattle smugglers used arms, even they cut off the fingers of a small girl, and the cattle owners would naturally react. And when they reacted, stray incidents were projected, and then this Lynchstone narrative was created. But if you compare the number of deaths inflicted by cattle smugglers on cattle owners, then you would find that it is higher. The number is higher than the so-called lynchers. Yet they created this false narrative. So this lynching had never been part of the even political campaign of any of the parties, whether it is BJP or RSS or even Bajrang Dal. But it was a secular fight basically a secular fight between cattle owners and cattle smugglers, which was converted into a communal agenda, which was given a communal color by the so-called secular press.
So you're saying that by and large, what you're saying is that Hindu society is far more benign, far more enlightened, far more experiential, and far more tolerant and pluralistic than other communities in the world, other cultures and civilizations in the world. And it's media which is projecting Hindu in a bad light.
Exactly. The same way, during pre-Holocaust time, the bad Jew was a given. Now, a bad Hindu is a given.
I was hoping that you would address the issue of women in this Hindutva vision of Indian society. But there is no chapter on women particularly. But I want to understand, there is one section in the proponents of Hindutva who have almost mimicked or imitated the vision that Abrahamic faiths or even Muslim communities have for women. They see women in a very regressive. What is the status and what is the position and what is the vision for women in Hindutva society?
In this book, actually, there are places, sections.
Yes,
There are sections
yes.
that deal with it. One is that of Harbilas Sharda, I just said, okay, and another one is about how Swami Shraddhanand and Lala Lajpat Rai, they worked to create a hostel for women at that time for even unwed mothers. Even today, it would be a problem.
Yes.
But they got a hostel running where women who had been molested or women who had been abused, they could come and get a room there. They could bring up their children there, and they would be given education. They would be given training in crafts, etc., so that they could stand on their own. Hindutva had addressed even this particular aspect. Remember, during the COVID times, during the pandemic times, RSS Swayamsevaks, they went and they distributed relief materials, food, etc., even for sex workers. Okay, so this regressive thing that you talk about, it belongs to certain sections of the orthodoxy, and those sections are going to remain. In any society, those sections are going to remain. Again, we cannot essentialize the entire Hindu society and particularly the Hindutva movement with those voices.
So you're saying the orthodox section is a minority section, it's a fringe, and the larger Hindu society is progressive, and they have the same values as any progressive society in the world?
We have better values, and I would say that rather than call it orthodoxy, I would call it socially stagnant sections. Those socially stagnant sections would always be there everywhere, because when we tell orthodoxy, let us say the so-called Vedic orthodoxy, you would find that some of the greatest statements on women liberation had come from so-called orthodox people. This is a very complicated issue. Why I haven't written much about it? Because I am not a woman. I don't have a right to tell what is right or wrong for a woman being a man, right? So I haven't got deep into it, but I have shown that Hindutva have been able to empower, or rather I would say give energy for emancipation for women. Let me give you one very strong example that is there in this book. We talk about science and Hindutva, and we talk about a magazine run by Vigyan Bharati, which is a Sang's wing for dealing with science. And they deal with gender issues in the institutions of science and how we can increase the participation of women in institutions of science. Now tell me, which right-wing organization would do this? Which fundamentalist organization would do this? So are they fundamentalist? Are they right-wing really? They are beyond right-wing and fundamentalism. They are dharmic organizations. The whole process is a dharmic process. A dharmic process, by its very nature, will be in favor of gender justice.
Tell me, there's a view that if a lot of activists, feminists in this country are going to support Muslim women on, say, triple talaq, or on, say, Muslim women being part of the clergy in masjids, would it also apply to Hindus? Would Hindu women also become, say, part of the maybe Hindu temple control boards, or the priest class, which is essentially mostly male? Do you think Hindu women will be at par with men in religious affairs, in affairs where only men have so far been performing?
When the society changes and when the participation of women increases, naturally these changes would happen. There are a lot of women purohits. Okay, remember Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi brought a coals on Karmakant, UGC recognized coals. When you are teaching a UGC recognized coals, you cannot restrict it for one particular gender. Everybody will study. When you run an UGC course, then you will have to implement the so-called reservations. So the OBCs, MBCs, SCs, STs, everybody would study. So when they study all this and they become purohits in their own villages, they would be challenging the socially stagnant system naturally. From whom this idea came actually? It came from Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi, who was considered as kind of very orthodox, fundamentalist, etc., etc.
Right? Who was blamed for saffronization of
education. So what was he actually doing? He was empowering, he was challenging the social stagnation at a very fundamental level. The way the so-called leftist progressive can never even imagine, number one. Number two, you consider the example of Mata Amritanandamayi. Mata Amritanandamayi comes from, we never talk about the community of the sages, but just because now the discourse is like this, we are talking. So she comes from a marginalized fisherman community, okay, coastal community. She comes from that. She creates temples called Brahmasthana temples. These Brahmasthana temples are everywhere in India, silently. And who are the priests there? Women are the priests there. How is this happening? This is also part of Hindutva. This is also part of Hinduism. This is part of Hindu Dharma. So this silently this is happening. In the case of, let us say, Sabarimala, I will tell you from my own experience, okay. I had to go to Trivandrum, which is a nearby, and it is the capital city of Kerala. It's a nearby city. I had to one day go there for some work. That day happened to be Archakal Pungal. Okay, Archangal Bhagavati is a goddess. They put Pungal or rice offerings to the goddess. I didn't know that on that day. I have gone inside. Point is, that day, men are not supposed to enter the place. The entire city is off limits for men to go and walk in the streets, etc., etc. Because they were all the women throughout Kerala. They would come and they would be doing this ritual. The sacred space for women is completely restricted for the sacred space, particular gender, and the other gender is not allowed into that sacred space that is gender specific. The same way, the case of Sabarimala, it was a gender specific sacred space. That's all. That particular. That way, Hinduism
But
is.
why was the insistence on menstruating women are not permitted? Why was this women of menstruating age are not permitted? This was the bottom line. This was the underlying cause which everyone was invoking for banning women's entry there.
If it has been a general rule for banning women in all the worshipping places, then they have a point. Okay, this is a specific temple with a specific deity, with a specific Purana attached to that deity.
A lot of communities, even till this date in India, think that menstruating women are impure. A lot of, in fact, communities bar women from entering the temple within the house because if they are menstruating.
Right?
Isn't this a regressive thought or argument?
We can see it both ways. And of course, it is in a way regressive. It is not essential to Hinduism. It is not essential to our Dharma. For example, my grandmother used to practice these things very seriously, very strictly. My mother was slowly, from the period time of my mother and then my daughters, these things are moving away. Now, let us see another one parallel of the Jewish women. Okay, Judaism has very strong tenets, and they say that after this particular period, the woman should actually take bath in a natural waters, and then only she could enter the house and start doing the household works and everything. It is even stricter than for Hindu women. What had happened was that the Jewish establishment, generally the Jewish society, they found a very innovative solution for this. They created places where women, after that particular time, could come together and have a very nice, interesting bath, have a retreat like thing, get rejuvenated and go back home. And now these places are getting booked like for months together in United States and other places, Israel, United States and other places. So here you have, can we say that the Jewish society is very regressive and patriarchal? You can say that. Or you can say that, but Israel has a very great number of women enrollment in science, in technological studies, in STEM and in military, right? So there is women empowerment in the society, and this also happens. They both exist side by side.
So exactly my point, that if menstruating women can be doctors in a hospital, they can be engineers in a company, they can be mechanical engineers, all kinds of engineers, they can be in the military, they can run the household, they can be in the kitchen, they can do all the household chores, they can do all the chores outside the house. If they're not impure while performing all those important fundamental functions of human life, how can they be impure while trying to connect with their spiritual essence in a temple?
Number one, I don't consider them impure. Okay, personally, I don't consider them impure. And if my mother or if my daughter or if my wife is performing a particular ritual when she is in that particular state, I don't have a problem. If they feel like doing it, let them do it. Okay, the same way I would say, if the society, particularly the women in the society at large, not led by this establishment family, the women at society at large, if they feel that, then this naturally get relegated. This will naturally fall off. And if it falls off, it is good. Okay, but if you are going to impose it, if the state legislature, if the state is bringing out a kind of a legislation that says that this many number of women having this particular condition should be there in the temple at any particular given day, if they are going to create a state legislation like that, then that is problematic.
But
Whereas,
if the state legislation is that women have right, menstruating women have right to enter any temple, will there be a problem?
women, let us
Women
say,
might, okay, let me put this question in a different way. Women might, on their own, not volunteer to enter the temple. They might not go to, for example, Sabrimala while they are menstruating. Their choice. But don't you think there should be a provision in law that women have the right, if someone wants to, if out of 100, one woman wants to go, is there
if
a problem?
if in the case of Sabrimala, it is a problem. Specifically in the case of Sabrimala, because the sacred space has already been defined by tradition through the Sthala Purana, through the nature of the deity. Like in the case of Achangal Pongal, if a single male wants to go and sit there and do the Pongal, which is only reserved for women, is it right?
Well, it's a tradition, and traditions, you yourself said, Hindu society,
Exactly.
Hindutva is essentially experience. And experience can be different in different contexts. What was relevant, say, or what was experiential 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago may be a different experience today. So, if that is what you're arguing in the book, then experience can change. It will
See,
change.
the
And
forms, the outer forms will change. Okay. So when the outer forms change, for example, in the case of Achangal, what I consider is this is again an important aspect of Hindu religion, Hindu Dharma, that it is also body centric to a particular point. For example, there is a festival in Tamil Nadu only for transgenders. Only transgenders are allowed to participate in that festival. Nobody else. The entire village, only the transgenders would come. They now even conduct beauty pageants for transgenders there. Okay, so it is a very, very, in a way, empowering thing for the transgenders to come there. Only they are allowed. Only the goddess, they belong to them that day. And so it is a very important thing for them. The same way you take Sabrimala. It is almost like an all male, for want of a better word, I am saying that it is like an all male club where only the men are coming, and for 40 days they are doing this puja, rituals, everything, and they are going and they are coming back, they feel rejuvenated. The same way Achangal Pongal. You have only women doing this Pongal, and it is very, 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 I can say, empowering for the people, rejuvenating for the women. There is a temple in our place, okay, called Mandaikadu, which is called Sabarimala of women, where the women go with this same kind of attire, everything like you go for Sabarimala. And these are things that are specific, gender specific. These, not all the temples. These temples are gender specific. And we have to value that particular tradition and creation of that gender specific sacred spaces. That is one. Whereas you come to this about the notion of purity, impurity, etc., associated with menstruation and everything, I would say that let the society debate it, have dialogues, churn it out, let even the feminists, the dharmacharyas, the social scientists, uh, medical experts, let them all sit, sociologists, let them all sit, have a constructive debate, and let us evolve things.
okay,
Let not politicians come into it.
yes, I won't press this further because the other side of the argument would be that in Muslim society also, or in Christian society also, if there is segregation, there is segregation because there's a tradition to it. There are those boundaries have been already defined by society previously, and segregation within a masjid, segregation within, say, household, and likewise. So the argument then becomes far more complicated because
Not actually, no. I will tell you why. Because I said universally, these are specific spaces. I told that very clearly, right? If Islamic theologians say that certain provisions in Islam, certain provisions in Quran, certain views in Quran, they are all time specific. They are no more needed here. They are just traditions. They can evolve. They can change. I am very happy about it. Okay. For example, the marriage age of women. In fact, in many Islamic countries now, they have become practical. They don't tell that because a particular person got married at a particular age to a particular person some centuries ago, right? Because of that, we have to maintain the same age. Now, most of the Islamic countries are de facto accepting the fact that they belonged to a particular age, so they are not relevant now, right? In the case of witnesses, eyewitnesses for sexual abuse, things are changing. Okay, so implicitly they are also accepting this fact, whereas in the case of India, they are becoming more and more fundamentalist and they want to impose all these things on all the women collectively. The case of Hindus also, let me tell it very clearly, the case of Hindus also. When Sharda Act came, a lot of great people, great dharmacharyas, some of them were venerated almost as gods. They said that bringing this legislation will destroy the entire society. What happened actually? They were proved wrong. The society moved forward. And the society moved forward, that is the dharmic way. The dharmacharyas were wrong. And for saying this, I may get abused, but let me tell it very clearly. The dharmacharyas who opposed child marriage restraining act were wrong. The dharma was in the side of the reformers.
Yes.
Right? The same way here also, because I am very hesitant to talk about this particular aspect because I am not a woman. Simply, I am not qualified to talk about it.
What is Akhand Bharat? The idea that India is beyond the existing boundaries has been prevalent in the Sangh since its inception. What is this Akhand Bharat, and how do you envision this Akhand Bharat at a time when you already have parts of that, the vision, the envisioned Akhand Bharat in Pakistan and in Bangladesh and in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka? So, what is this? Like, is this Hindutva vision of India going to be an expansionist vision, an imperialistic vision, like the Chinese imperialists today, or the Western imperialists today, or the Arab imperialists?
In the book, I have actually shown how Ramanohar Lohiya and Deendayal Upadhyaya, they have defined this very clearly. This is not a fantasy of military expansionism. No, it is about creating bonds based on culture, based on an inclusive culture with nations like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc. Okay, I will give you a very good example of this from a very recent movie, Ram Setu. If you look at Ram Setu, it starts with Afghanistan, through Pakistan, and ultimately it goes to Sri Lanka. And what it shows is that there is a cultural unity in all this. And because there is a cultural unity in all this, and if we are realizing this cultural unity, irrespective of the barriers that we have created, the nation state barriers that we have created, we can create a very wonderful, prosperous, cooperative body among us. And that was kind of realized in SARC. When SARC came,
let me interrupt you here. So, you see cultural unity, cultural continuum in SARC. Why don't you see this cultural continuity, cultural past, or cultural cohesion in Southeast Asia also? Because from Cambodia to Indonesia to several other countries in Southeast Asia, we see a Hindu history, a Hindu past. Why is this Akhand Bharat limited to these boundaries as the Sangh has envisioned?
Because there is a very physical geographical unity here. We have been, in our very cultural memories, we have been united, we have been one. In very recent times, still very recent times, we have been one. So it is very easy for us to again recognize this unity and come into contact and have cooperation so that actually we can form a model for the entire world, that how through this culture, and this culture is not a culture that is based on a particular dress code or a particular belief system or a particular theology. This is a cultural system by its very nature is open, and it has been synthesizing, it has been assimilating, and it has been creating new beautiful
So
forms.
why does this Akhand Bharat exclude parts of China, Tibet, for example?
In the case of Tibet, we have always considered it as part of our greater family. And it is the mistake, it is not a mistake, the criminal blunder of certain rulers, which resulted in it getting annexed by China. Now, the case of Tibet also, we want its autonomy. We want it to be a Buddhist country, and we want it to be in relation with India. And when we talk about Akhanda Bharat, and we are thinking in terms of all these units around us, number one. Number two, from this Akhanda Bharat, we also visualize a Vishal Bharat, and we also visualize a Visva Bharat. And what is this Visva Bharat? It is not again a global domination. You would remember that it was in 2009, I think, Lisa Miller who wrote that cover story telling that we are all Hindus now. How all the Americans are Hindus in the sense they were accepting theodiversity. And that is the very natural positive movement of the human psyche to accept theodiversity. And India can be a catalyst in achieving that. India can be a model to the entire world to show that theodiversity actually works, that you don't have to belong to a monotheistic expansionist worldview to achieve an universalism. You can sustain theodiversity and you can attain universalism. Akhanda Bharat is this in a nutshell. It is not whatever else it is. It is not military expansionism or kind of a supremacism.
Last final question. You've written a chapter on the Sangh Parivar, RSS. And if you talk to people who do not recognize India as a Hindu majority country, they will tell you that RSS is fascistic, RSS is totalitarian, RSS is authoritarian. They see RSS as, in fact, the first question to begin with was this whole Hindutva idea is seen as a fascistic project. And RSS is seen as an instrument which is trying to implement this fascistic vision. What is RSS today?
One is Ashfaqullah Khan. So who was Ashfaqullah Khan? He was a great freedom fighter. He was almost a mentor of Bhagat Singh, right? If you go and search for a biography of Ashfaqullah Khan, you will find that the easily available biography was the biography published by Rashtrotan Parishad of RSS.
Yes, I read about
children,
it.
For the children. Okay. So what kind of a Hindu communal fascist organization wants its children to learn about Ashfaqullah Khan? Number one. Number two, in Pune, the RSS school teachers, after their regular time, went to a particular school run by a Muslim charitable foundation, trained the students there for SSLC, and for the first time in Pune, a Muslim boy got SSLC district rank because of this coaching by RSS teachers. And the manager of the director of that charitable foundation acknowledged this. So what kind of a fascist Nazi organization would go after their regular time, go and assume this? There is this Nazi organization, and from there the people go, and after their regular working time they go to a Jewish school, they train the Jewish children there so that the Jewish children would get the first rank in Berlin's examination. So this very clearly shows that RSS is not a fascist or a communal
So are you
organization.
saying that RSS is all right with Islam? It has no issues with Islam.
It is not about Islamism, it is about Muslims.
RSS
We don't
has
have
no
a
issues
problem
with
with
Muslims.
Muslims as individuals, as Muslims as citizens of India. We don't have a problem. They are, Guruji Golwalkar wrote this, okay? Guruji Golwalkar, whom everybody loves to hate in the secular world, he wrote this. When you do seva, never discriminate between a Hindu, Christian, Muslim or anyone, and do the seva. Now you can ask the question, okay, so RSS is doing seva activities very wonderfully for Christians and Muslims because they want to convert them to Hinduism. Guruji told this very clearly, not because of your ideology, not because you are doing some kind of charity work, but you should serve, whether he is a Christian or a Muslim, you should serve the person the same bhavana of puja that you do to the deity. Because
So why do you think Muslims call RSS anti-Muslim,
RSS
RSS
is not
as
anti-Muslim,
anti-Islam.
RSS is not anti-Christian, RSS is against, as I said, monopolistic expansionism. Monopolistic expansionism in the form of proselytizing, monopolistic expansionism in the form of evangelical propaganda, monopolistic expansionism in the form of jihadist violence. RSS is definitely against all this. If a person identifies jihad as Islam, a holy war as a particular religion, then RSS is definitely against that particular religion.
RSS has an issue with Islam.
RSS does not have an issue with Islam if Islam is not expansionism. If Islam is expansionism, RSS has a problem.
So you are all right. RSS is all right with Sharia, with Muslim personal law. Is
If you
RSS
are-
okay with Muslim
RSS
personal
doesn't
law?
talk about that. Whether it is okay or not, that question does not arise. That change should come from the community. And Indian state is different. Indian state is duty bound to do two things. One is it should implement common civil code. That is the basis of a secular state. That the Indian
So
state should
RSS
do.
is for secularism.
Actually, we have to be for secularism. But now I am talking about the Indian state and RSS. RSS does not talk about whether Sharia should come or whether Sharia should not come. It is none of RSS business. But whether there should be a uniform civil code, that is, I would say, one of the basis of secularism. So if Indian government is secular, it has to make sure that at least it creates a condition that is conducive for uniform civil code to come. That is number one. Number two, RSS is for secularism in another one way also. Every person in this nation, every child in this nation, whether it is Christian or Hindu or Muslim or Jew or Parsi, they are entitled to the cultural education of this nation. So they should be taught Ramayana. No child should be denied the right to learn Ramayana and Mahabharata just because of its religion. So every child in India should know Ramayana. Every child in India should know Mahabharata.
So would the reverse also be true that every child in India should have the right to be taught, say, Quran or
We are talking about the
Bible?
belief systems. I am not talking about the belief systems. I am not telling that every child should be made to believe in reincarnation or should be taught about reincarnation. I am not telling that every child should be taught that Ram is Bhagavan, he was the seventh avatar of Vishnu. I am telling every child should have the right to learn Ramayana, Mahabharata. It should know the Shad Darisanas, which is the cultural legacy of each and every Indian. An Indian state should do that. A secular state should do that. Because it is a secular state. It should not deny a student his or her right to learn his or her heritage just because she belongs to a particular religion.
So you are making a distinction between Ramayana, Mahabharata. You think that they are that is our cultural heritage.
It is our culture.
But you're saying that Hindus who converted and adopted Quran, adopted Sharia and Hadith, that is not their cultural heritage.
It is their belief system. Their belief system belongs to their personal space. This is the national heritage. It belongs to the secular space. So every child should have the
So
right.
in a way you're saying Hinduism is not a religion. It's not a belief system.
Hindus are the nation in Hindustan. I am just re-quoting Veer Savarkar.
Yes. So what you're saying is that every child in the country should be taught Ramayana and Mahabharata. And are there any other texts?
Ramayana, Mahabharata, the six darsanas. They should know the six darsanas.
What about Guru Granth Sahib? Is
Of course,
that our...
Guru Granth Sahib. Of course, Guru Granth Sahib. They should know about Tripitaka. They should know about... See, right now, if you look at your history textbooks, you are teaching every child, irrespective of the child's religion, Buddha and Mahavira.
But they're not teaching Guru Gobind Singh.
They are not teaching Guru Gobind Singh. They are not teaching Upanishads. You look at the textbooks. I went through all the textbooks. And what I found was that the Vedic period is mentioned. Vedic period is told. But Upanishads are kind of just like that past. And you don't even learn the Mahavakyas. And Mahavakyas are the zenith of your culture. A person like Dr. Ambedkar, who is very critical of the Hindu society, he said that the Upanishad Mahavakyas are the spiritual basis of democracy if democracy is a way of life. In fact, he said democracy is a way of life, and he said these Mahavakyas are the spiritual basis of democracy. It is only based on this democracy can be strong. And you are not even teaching them in your textbooks to the children. How you will strengthen India's democracy then? So the point is, you have to teach these things to the children. No child in India should be denied the right to learn these things just because the child belongs to a particular religion. That is worse than apartheid.
Thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. Thank you for being with us today. Thanks.
Thank you so
Namaskar.
much.